Hey guys, it's Mrs. Yeagle again. This is the second part of Chapter 4, and I'm starting on the top of page 47, right after that small little paragraph break, and we'll go until about the middle of page 53. In this section, I really want you to pay attention to the punctuation as I read, especially the part on page 49. There's a large paragraph describing how Harry travels with flu powder, and you'll notice that J.K. Rowling doesn't use periods at all. And the way that she punctuates it really changes the way that we would read that paragraph. So listen as I read and pay attention so you can see how that makes it different. And toward the end of this reading, I want you to pay attention to how Mr. Borgin changes his attitude once Mr. Malfoy leaves the shop. And after you read and listen to that part, I want you to think about how that change makes us understand better how Mr. Malfoy views himself and how other people view Mr. Malfoy in the Wizarding world. So watch for that. Here we go, page 47. Mrs. Weasley woke them all the following Wednesday. After a quick half-a-dozen bacon sandwiches each, they pulled on their coats, and Mrs. Weasley took a flower pot off the kitchen mantelpiece and peered inside. "We're running low, Arthur," she sighed. "We'll have to buy some more today." "Oh, well, guess first. After you, Harry dear." She offered him the flower pot. Harry stared at them all, watching him. "What am I supposed to do?" he stammered. "He's never traveled by flu powder," said Ron suddenly. "Sorry, Harry, I forgot." "Never?" said Mr. Weasley. "But how did you get to Diagon Alley to buy your school things last year?" "I went on the Underground." "Really?" said Mr. Weasley eagerly. "Were there escapators?" "How exactly—" "Not now, Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley. "Flu powder's a lot quicker, dear, but goodness me, if you've never used it before—" "He'll be all right, Mum," said Fred. "Harry, watch us first." He took a pinch of the glittering powder out of the flower pot, stepped up to the fire, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar, the fire turned emerald green and rose higher than Fred, who stepped right into it, shouted, "Diagon Alley!" and vanished. "You must speak clearly, dear," Mrs. Weasley told Harry, as George dipped his hand into the flower pot. "And be sure to get out at the right grate." "The right what?" said Harry nervously, as the fire roared and whipped George out of sight, too. "Well, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to choose from, you know, but as long as you've spoken clearly—" "He'll be fine, Molly, don't fuss," said Mr. Weasley, helping himself to flu powder, too. "But, dear, if he got lost, how would we ever explain to his aunt and uncle?" "Oh, they wouldn't mind," Harry reassured her. "Dudley would think it was a brilliant joke if I got lost up a chimney. Don't worry about that." "Well, all right. You go after Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley. "Now, when you get into the fire, say where you're going." "And keep your elbows tucked in," Ron advised. "And your eyes shut," said Mrs. Weasley. "The soot—" "Don't fidget," said Ron, "or you might well fall out of the wrong fireplace." "But don't panic and get out too early. Wait until you see Fred and George." Trying hard to bear all this in mind, Harry took a pinch of flu powder and walked to the edge of the fire. He took a deep breath, scattered the powder into the flames, and stepped forward. The fire felt like a warm breeze. He opened his mouth and immediately swallowed a lot of hot ash. "Diagon Alley!" he coughed. It felt as though he was being sucked down a giant drain. He seemed to be spinning very fast. The roaring in his ears was deafening. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the whirl of green flames made him feel sick. Something hard knocked his elbow as he tucked it in slightly, still spinning and spinning. Now it felt as though cold hands were slapping his face. Squinting through his glasses, he saw a blurred stream of fireplaces and snatched glimpses of the rooms beyond. His bacon sandwiches were churning inside him. He closed his eyes again, wishing it would stop, and then he fell face forward onto cold stone and felt the bridge of his glasses snap. Dizzy and bruised, covered in soot, he got gingerly to his feet, holding his broken glasses up to his eyes. He was quite alone, but where he was, he had no idea. All he could tell was that he was standing in the stone fireplace of what looked like a large, dimly lit wizard shop, but nothing in here was ever likely to be on a Hogwarts school list. A glass case nearby held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-looking masks stared down from the walls, an assortment of human bones lay upon the counter, and rusty, spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. Even worse, the dark, narrow street Harry could see through the dusty shop window was definitely not Diagon Alley. The sooner he got out of here, the better. Nose still stinging where it had hit the hearth, Harry made his way swiftly and silently toward the door. But before he got halfway toward it, two people appeared on the other side of the glass, and one of them was the very last person Harry wanted to meet when he was lost, covered in soot, and wearing broken glasses. Draco Malfoy. Harry looked quickly around and spotted a large black cabinet to his left. He shot inside it and pulled the doors closed, leaving a small crack to peer through. Seconds later, a bell clanged, and Malfoy stepped into the shop. The man who followed could only be Draco's father. He had the same pale, pointed face and identical cold gray eyes. Mr. Malfoy crossed the shop, looking lazily at the items on display, and rang a bell on the counter before turning to his son and saying, "Touch nothing, Draco." Malfoy, who had reached for the glass eye, said, "I thought you were going to buy me a present." "I said I would buy you a racing broom," said his father, drumming his fingers on the counter. "What's the good of that if I'm not on the house team?" said Malfoy, looking sulky and bad-tempered. "Harry Potter got a Nimbus 2000 last year. Special permission from Dumbledore so he could play for Gryffindor. He's not even that good. It's just because he's famous. Famous for having a stupid scar on his forehead." Malfoy bent down to examine a shelf full of skulls. "Everyone thinks he's so smart. Wonderful Potter with his scar and his broomstick." "You have told me this at least a dozen times already," said Mr. Malfoy with a quelling look at his son, "and I would remind you that it is not prudent to appear less than fond of Harry Potter, not when most of our kind regard him as the hero who made the Dark Lord disappear. Ah, Mr. Borgin." A stooping man had appeared behind the counter, smoothing his greasy hair back from his face. "Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasure to see you again," said Mr. Borgin, in a voice as oily as his hair. "Delighted! And young Master Malfoy, too! Charmed! How may I be of assistance? I must show you Justin today, and very reasonably priced. I'm not buying today, Mr. Borgin, but selling," said Mr. Malfoy. "Selling?" The smile faded slightly from Mr. Borgin's face. "You have heard, of course, that the Ministry is conducting more raids," said Mr. Malfoy, taking a roll of parchment from his inside pocket and unraveling it for Mr. Borgin to read. "I have a few, items at home that might embarrass me if the Ministry were to call." Mr. Borgin fixed a pair of pince-nez to his nose and looked down the list. "The Ministry wouldn't presume to trouble you, sir, surely?" Mr. Malfoy's lip curled. "I have not been visited yet. The name Malfoy still commands a certain respect, yet the Ministry grows ever more meddlesome. There are rumors about a new Muggle Protection Act. No doubt that flea-bitten, Muggle-loving fool, Arthur